Hello everybody, it's Mr. Q again. What's up? I hope you guys are staying safe and having fun. Today, I wanted to talk to you guys about a recent trip that I took to Bandelier National Monument here in New Mexico. Bandelier National Monument is a special place in New Mexico where Native Americans once lived on the side of a cliff. It's a very cool experience and really interesting to see. So I want to share that with you today. So take some notes. Let's get into it. This is an interesting rock formation that you might see on the way to Bandelier. What does it look like? Yes, of course, it looks like a camel. That's why it's called Camel Rock. So, Bandelier National Monument, what is that? Well, let's start with what the nature aspect of it is. Well, what it is a place in a canyon. So, when a creek or a river flows through an area of earth that is not very strong, the water will cut into the rock and other materials, and eventually the creek or river will get deeper and deeper, making a big hole as the river or stream travels along the ground. So the Frijoles Creek, over thousands of years, eroded, wore away the rock and sedimentation, and created Frijoles Canyon. And for those of you who know Spanish, yes, frijoles means beans. So, this particular area, though, is very volcanic. It has a lot of what is called tuff. And tuff is volcanic ash that has settled and formed a rock type sediment. And so when the ash settles, obviously there's going to be air pockets inside it. And so that's what makes this area so special, because tuff is not very tough. It's actually very weak. So water running on it will erode it very easily. And using a tool that is harder, you can carve out the tuff and make blocks, or you can make holes in the cliff. And so the fact that this area was once provided with a lot of volcanic rock and ash from the Valle Grande area, which was just a few miles away from the volcanoes over there. This area became very special because people could make a home inside of the cliff. And there were parts of the cliff where they could travel up and create structures on the side, inside the cliff. So it's really cool, and we're going to show you some pictures of some of this today. Here you can see the Frijoles Canyon, where the Bandelier cliff dwellings are located. Yeah, those air pockets in the ash are called cavities. And so when you have a cavity is simply a open area inside a rock or whatever. They call that a cavity. So they made their dwellings inside these cavities in the rock wall. You can see here how there are many holes in the rock. That was the air pockets, the cavities, that the Native Americans used to create their dwellings in the side of the cliffs. Alright, so who was it that developed that area? Well, it looks like it was the Anasazi Indians. The Native American Indians, the Anasazi, lived in that area from 1200 to 1600, about. So in about the range of 400 years-ish, the Anasazi Indians lived there, and they created structures, and they expanded the cavities inside the rock of the cliff, and they lived there because Bandelier is at an interesting elevation where it's kind of like in between elevations, where you have different animals and plants from two different zones, two different elevation zones that inhabit that area. So it is rich with extra life. Instead of being one type of animals or plants, you have the two kinds. So it gives them a little bit more diversity with what they can hunt and what they can grow there. And so maybe when they first settled there, they mostly hunted, and maybe they moved around still and came back there when the animals were there. But maybe other Indians later on settled there more permanently and grew some corn and squash and stuff there. So over a few hundred years they stayed there, and they ended up leaving because it seems like there was a large drought, which means there wasn't much rain, and that means it was very, very dry. Remember, New Mexico's in the desert, right? So occasionally it gets super dry there, and if you're reliant on water to feed your plants and to feed the animals you hunt, then if there's no water, it's going to be very difficult to live there, and you might have to move somewhere else. And that's apparently what happened. They had to move somewhere else where there was more water and more animals, because right there wasn't very many left. There were many types of animals that the Anasazi Indians may have hunted while they lived here. Here you can see a squirrel that they might have eaten at one point. And here, of course, there's deer that were available to be hunted. And so obviously many animals have come back because the drought that once drove those Native Americans away is over and has more water, and so more plants and animals have returned. As you look at the cliff dwellings, you can see that on the lower sections at the base of the canyon, there are a bunch of tiny little round holes, and those holes are indicators of how many floors that were used. And it looks like there were 3 floors that were used for people to live in and to store things. So what they did was they took the ponderosa pines, because those are famous for being very straight, and they created vigas, which were basically just beams to support their roof or floor, depending on which level you're on. And they stuck the poles into those holes in the rock that they made, and then they could make another level. And it's a good way to extend your dwelling without having to continue to dig into the cliff, because even though the tuff is soft compared to the tools they were using, it's still a lot of work. So it's better to extend it out with some wood and stuff instead of trying to continue to dig in and spending a lot of hard work doing that. Here you can see how they expanded the cavities to make doorways, and you can see the round holes that were used for the vigas. Obviously, many of these dwellings are difficult to get to, so they needed to create stairs or ladders to be able to get to their dwellings. This also added a level of protection from animals and attackers. In this picture, you can see how they expanded the cavities to make more space inside the cliff. Here, it's easy to see the different layers of volcanic ash and rock. It can be a little scary climbing up these ladders to these cliff dwellings, and because you can see how high up they are on the cliff. And sometimes it would take several ladders to get to some of these cliff dwellings. But once you get up there, you have a beautiful view from up there. It's just amazing how they lived up on these cliffs. And those cliffs provided protection from weather, from other tribes that tried to attack them, and from animals like mountain lions. Alright guys, let's recap what we talked about today. We talked about how Bandelier National Monument is located in the Frijoles Canyon, which was created by the Frijoles Creek that runs through the middle of it. And the rock in that area was formed from the volcanic rock and ash that came from the Valle Grande volcanoes that are a few miles away. And so that volcanic rock and ash created tough rock, and that tough rock, because it's a lot of different type of materials, has air pockets called cavities. And the Native American Indian Anasazis who lived there, they combined and enlarged some of those cavities so that they could live inside the cliff wall, and they were even able to climb up the cliff and create structures and live up on the middle of the cliff, not just at the base of the cliff. But at the base of the cliff, you can see how they extended some of their dwellings with vigas, and you can tell that because of the holes that are on the side of the cliff at the base, showing how many levels that they used to create those dwellings. And so the Anasazi Indians lived there between about 1200 to 1600, and so over about a course of 400 years, those Native Americans came and went and lived there, and they did well there until probably a big drought came and made them search for a better place to live that had more water and more plants and animals there. So today's homework, I'd like you guys to think about some place that you visited that is very old. All right, where is some place that you have gone that is very old? I want you guys to describe what you saw. And if you've never been anywhere that was very old, then describe your family's home. It's up to you. So, if you have not been anywhere very old, then just describe your family home. Write it down, at least 10 sentences. And then, of course, once you're finished, share with your classmates. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.